Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this morning to discuss EdTech and technologies to close the attainment gap and support SEND students. As you can probably see in the chat, there has been a slight change to the programming this morning. Unfortunately, Carol's not able to join us. We are joined by the brilliant Kat instead, who I will get to introduce herself in a moment. And the chat is going to remain open. So if you have any questions while we are talking this morning, please pop it in the chat and we will respond and we'll discuss the questions and suggestions perhaps that you have. So it's a different type of session this morning to perhaps the other ones that you've attended so far at the summit. We are just going to have a really informal chat around tech that can be used to close the attainment gap, support our PP students, support our children living in digital poverty and SEND children. It is really informal. We are just going to chat. We are all qualified teachers, so please don't feel that any question is a silly question, because it's definitely not. Just share it with us and we can discuss it. So without further ado, I'm Gemma Kosh. I am Innovation Manager for TTS, which means that my job is to design and invent all of the brilliant EdTech resources that we supply, which arguably is the best job in the world. I am an ex-computer science and ICT teacher. I did my PGC in 2006. Gosh, that long ago, Bassett, with Bassett. So I was at the chalk face for well over a decade before moving into my current role. So if I can hand over to you, Bassett, first, do you mind introducing yourself for me?
Absolutely not. Thank you for the little introduction, Gemma. And I can't believe it was 2006. That makes me feel very old.
Really old, yeah.
Very old. But yeah, so my name's Bassett Siddiqui. I'm now the director of my own company, and it has the most unoriginal name, is Siddiqui Education. But I, similar to Gemma, worked in education for 10 years in IT, business and computer science secondary school. Still massively passionate about education, but I do things slightly differently these days. Basically, Siddiqui Education, it involves a lot of different weird and wonderful things, but at its core, I work with disadvantaged students to support them build their confidence, their aspirations, and most importantly, their skill set as well. I do that through using lots of different technology. And it's been a fantastic journey for me for the last 3 years, just networking with so many different people, for example, the folks at TTS, and lots of weird and wonderful people up and down the country. So hopefully I'll be able to share some advice and insights with you this morning. And as Gemma said, please do get involved. If you've got any questions about anything we go through, please do feel free to ask. I think that's all right. Introduction, is that all right? Yeah, I think
that's wonderful. I'm wondering if I'm in the weird or the weird category, but yes. And Kat, would you mind introducing yourself too, please?
Yeah, hi. So I'm Kat Jukes, and I am. I was a primary school teacher for about 8 years. I think it was. It feels like this last couple of years has made everything go a bit longer and slower. So I worked right across from nursery through to year 6 over the time that I was teaching, and I was also a Senko for 5 of those years, covering all the young people with special educational needs in school from nursery through to year 6. And then when I moved out of teaching, I went to work for a local authority, and I was a special educational needs officer who covered about 70 schools across part of the local authority, going into nurseries, mainstream primary schools, specialist settings, secondary schools, and supporting young people in colleges. So that was right from the age of 0 to 25 in that role. So that gave me the opportunity to see sort of special educational needs provision across a wide area of settings. And then I got the wonderful opportunity to be able to come and join TTS and RM. So now I'm a content editor. So I work with educational experts for blogs, for catalogue content, and partnering with people to basically help sort of support teachers and support practitioners in the roles that they do. So that's me.
That's fab, Kat. Thank you so much. And thank you for joining us as well at such a last minute notice. We really superstar. So we've prepared some questions to go through. So let's start at the beginning. So the first question I prepared was, what practical tips would you have for NQTs and RQTs when using tech in the classroom? Now, we probably feel a long way away from our NQT year, but some parts of it are probably really stuck in our mind, and terrifying bit. So using tech in the classroom, whether that's software or hardware based, what tips would we, even really fundamental, rudimentary tips? Bassett, do you want to kick us off with that one?
Yeah, absolutely, Gemma. And I know it feels like a lifetime ago that we were NQTs or RQTs, but I've been in a very fortunate position throughout my career to be able to mentor and support lots of trainee teachers and also recently qualified teachers and mentor them as well. And the beauty of my job, having been in education for 10 years, in particular in ICT and computer science, have it day in, day out working with IT and technology. And it can be quite daunting if that isn't what you do on a regular basis. You do become a little bit digitally resilient to it. And ultimately, I think the main thing to consider, if you are an NQT or an RQT, or you're not used to the technological world for whatever reason, the main thing, and it might sound a little bit cliche, is to take it in your stride, to explore whatever tech is out there. If you're planning to use something new, obviously do your due diligence, do your research, plan as much as you can do for everything to go perfectly, but also accept that things are out of your control when it comes to technology. Once it happens a couple of times, you'll have your freak out moments where the technology hasn't worked the way that you want it to, but it's never the end of the world. And you will learn to build your own personal toolkit on how to sort of strategies on how to get around that. And the reason why it has to be your own personal toolkit really is because every single school is different. They will have different budgetary constraints. They'll have new technology, old technology, two bits of technology working together in weird and wonderful ways. And it's about you learning and experiencing specifically to you and the needs and what your school have and working around that. And you'll be amazed how empowered you feel once you've done it a couple of times. I take massive pride in the fact that I was able to, once I was confident in my profession, whatever happened, if there was a network crash, if something wasn't working the way it was, a child couldn't log in, knowing that you had these organic inbuilt strategies to support you, but they don't come over time. So ultimately, there are going to be times where you're using tech and it doesn't work how you want it to work, but all of that's a learning experience. It really, really is. And you'll look back at it and smile and think, yeah, actually, it was quite fun when that specific thing didn't work how I wanted it to work. Another thing as well that I think is really important, and sorry if I feel like I'm trailing off on it, but I also think that it's never a bad idea to let the students take ownership in certain situations. Try your best, and this is really difficult for us as educational practitioners, to be the person in the classroom at the front of the classroom, to let go of the reins a little bit, and to not only support the children in advising you and supporting you with a new bit of tech, but celebrating that as well. Because what you're doing in turn there is, if you are sort of championing that child and saying a massive well done for showing you how to do a specific thing, you're empowering that child, you're building that child's confidence. You can imagine they're going to go into their next lesson where tech isn't necessarily used as much, but in your classroom, there was something very special about them in that moment. So definitely don't shy away from that. If anything, celebrate that.
Yeah, I agree. Children always know more than you do. There's always one thing that, but they'll be like, oh, miss, look, I've done this. And you'll be like, how? That's amazing. But yeah, younger teachers, I think, sometimes are a bit perturbed by that. Like, they don't really know what to do with it, that the child's done something that they don't know what to do. But like you say, embrace it, celebrate it. It's brilliant. I think my advice is really, really boring, but things like always have a plan B, because there will always be something that goes wrong. Always have something in your arsenal that if it doesn't work, like, think about what's the worst thing that can happen in this particular lesson. You know, when 30 children have all got a Lego Mindstorm, what's the worst thing that can happen? You know, Johnny swallows a book. How am I going to do that? Like, really think it through and think about, what can I do? I can remember the first time I used the microbits when they were sent out, one to every year 7 child, and everyone was using them. But we, you know, you didn't really realize how many little fiddly bits there were with the battery holder and the batteries that had to come out at the end of every lesson. And sometimes you can just help yourself so tremendously by thinking through, how am I actually going to store this? Like, how are the kids going to put it away in a sensible time frame that means that things aren't going to get broken? Like, what's the storage solution for this? And plan that time as well. Like, the amount of time it takes to get things out and put them away, you don't always necessarily account for in your lesson. So as an NQT with trainee teachers that I would have seen, and I definitely did this, you'd be like trying to shoehorn a plenary in while kids are putting stuff in. And you're like, no, stop packing. Listen to me. We're doing the plenary, and damn it, we're doing this plenary. But, you know, and then your lesson would run over because you hadn't planned the time for actually putting things away at all. Kat, your experience would be a bit different because you're primary based as opposed to secondary. So what do you think?
I was just thinking, as soon as you said about the, you know, don't be afraid of what they can do, I remember my children in nursery had learned to be able to flip the interactive whiteboard screen round. So every day they would do that, and I had no idea how to turn it back. So I was completely reliant on them. But actually, it was such a learning experience because they'd learned something, they'd seen the reaction, they'd seen the response. So turning that into a positive action and saying, you know, oh, well, brilliant. And you've been able to do something I can't do. So now let me teach you something that, you know, and having that reciprocal, it wasn't a fearful factor. You know, when the head teacher walked in, he's like, why's your whiteboard flipped? I'm like, well, we're just learning. You know, it's embracing that, I suppose. And I think when I was thinking about that question, my advice is probably contradictory to each other, because I would keep it simple and don't try and be the kind of whiz and tech and everything, but then be adventurous as well. So have your, you know, array of really simple tech that you're comfortable with, that you're secure with, that you're happy and you're confident to use. And then drop in every now and again one thing to trial so that you still have that confidence. Because I think if you end up trying to do 50 different new pieces of tech or new ways of doing something, you start to feel out of control and you lose that confidence in yourself. And so much of it is about, you've got to build your own confidence up as you move through things.
Yeah, definitely. The children can tell if you're not confident with the tech that you're trying, and really you're not going to achieve any outcome if you're not confident with it either. So if that means as a trainee teacher that you need to take something home and ask your department, look, I need to take this home so I can actually learn how to use it and write some lessons, ask. Like, no one's going to say, oh no. The worst possible thing you could be doing really is being forced to teach a lesson with tech that you're not comfortable with, because in your early formative years of teaching, the stress that will bring is just not necessary on top of everything else. And I think something else that's really tricky as a young teacher is classroom management, when you get these amazing things out of the box, because all those strategies that you had to keep everyone engaged on a PC or on a laptop or on a tablet go out the window as soon as you get something, you know, wonderful out of a box, and all the kids are like, oh, this is amazing. But, you know, some of those behavior management strategies go out the window, don't they? And you need a different toolkit to deal with that.
Yeah.
So
I think going back to that, Gemma, that goes back to what you said as well about the fact that the more that you plan prior to it for every eventuality, and having those strategies in place, who's going to get the equipment out, who's going to put it back, what's going to happen at X, Y, and Z, then that is your form of behavior management in that situation to some degree as well. And then you will have your low level, high level, certain bits in between that, but at the core of it, you've got the majority of it in the bag. So yeah, really good advice. Definitely.
Yeah, and letting them play. You know, whenever I introduced a new piece of tech or something we hadn't used before, my first lesson, even if I shortened it to, you know, 20 minutes, half an hour, my first lesson was, this is something new, let's play. You know, we know from child development that children learn through play and their experiences. And actually, what better way for them to work out how to use something than discover it themselves? So I think sometimes knowing that, you know, I've got these new B-bots, or I've got this new rugged robot, or, you know, we've got some new tech we're going to use in maths, and saying, actually, it's okay, let's just play with it, and getting on the floor with them. Or, I mean, I'm not saying necessarily secondary, but you know, I would always, even up to year 6, you know, get on the floor with them, get them trying it out, go in the hall if you need more space. Giving children that almost green light means it's not a free-for-all and they're being naughty, and while you're trying to talk to them, they're you know, give them the chance and the opportunity to just explore.
I think that's such good advice. I think that kind of element of even it being a bit of a carrot for the end of the lesson, like, you know, you have 5 minutes at the beginning, let's play. We're going to have 5 minutes at the end before we pack up. You can have another play, but this, you know, this 40 minutes we're focusing and we're learning. I mean, they're learning when they're playing, really, but, you know, this is our objective and this is what we're going to get through. I think feeling comfortable with unstructured time comes with experience in teaching, doesn't it? So even if that playtime is structured and built into the lesson plan, that's something that you can feel more comfortable with as a younger teacher.
Yeah, and not being afraid that someone's going to walk in and think you've lost control of your class.
Yeah, absolutely.
Control by being out of control.
Yeah, Yeah, perfect.
It's unusual.
That's such good advice, Kat, and I'd totally forgotten about the turning of the screen. I don't think you could have taught IT in the mid-noughties without having the turn screen and the sticky keys.
Oh yeah.
But of course, when it was on a massive interactive whiteboard, and then I had to move the mouse to get to the right place to be able to turn it back round, it was
sticky keys used to drive me mad. Okay, so moving on then, which EdTech resources, and you'll be able to support with this, Kat, more, I think, would you recommend to schools to support SEND students? So specific resources or generalised resources that are really helpful to support SEND students. Do you want to pick up this first, Kat, because you'll have loads of experience in this area?
Yeah, I can do. I think the biggest thing I would say, kind of beyond the specific resources, is being really clear what the outcome is that you're looking for the young person. We know that with SEND young people, with all young people, we need to be clear what we're aiming for and what we're looking for. So whether those barriers to learning are around organisation and routine, whether they're around motivation, whether they're around memory and retention, or attention and concentration, it's being clear, well, what are we trying to solve and support the young person with, and then identifying the tech that will help that, because otherwise you might end up putting a piece of tech in that's really not relevant or necessary, or it adds another barrier to that learning process because the young person can't process what they need to do with it. So I think in terms of like one experience talk about is sort of around organisation and structure. We know that can often be an anxiety point, and routines can often be an anxiety point for a lot of young people with SEND. Is it PE today? Was it swimming? Did I remember to bring my kit? Is it maths next? Who's teaching me? Where do I need to be? All of that is a real blocker to being able to actually attend and listen in a lesson. So sort of technology, from the youngest ages, we used to use, recordable panels that they could put pictures on and then process it. And part of their daily routine would be, let's sit down, let's plan the day together, and we'll put all the information on, and you can record onto it there and then, from the details of which teacher it's going to be, who's going to be supporting them. So you can have big tech like that, and then as children progress and get older, you can have sort of bring the size of the tech down to make it that transition into adulthood more seamless, because the chances are those young people will still need similar level of support as they progress through education. But of course, walking around with a massive recordable talking panel in secondary schools isn't quite so easy. So you could have things like recordable buttons then that become smaller, and they can do that. Or things like, I'm a big fan of the new kit robot, where children can record onto the robot and then play it back as many times as they like. So that's one example for organisation. But I've realised I'm just waffling on now.
No, you're not. And I'm so interested listening to you.
I just think it's being really clear what part of their learning are you trying to support and engage. If it's memory and retention, again, recordable audio devices that they can listen and play back as many times as they want, whether that's through the talk time cards, anything sort of recordable for that area. But yeah,
I think sometimes as well, we're faced with quite niche technology. So I can think of particular students over my time at the Chalk Face that they were identified as needing a very specific piece of technology, and never again did I teach a child that had that particular specialist piece of technology. So things like iMice, foot mouse, adaptive monitor with a different refresh rate for epilepsy and visual processing issues. Things like exam pens, and sometimes they would come to you as a student with this particular need or desire for this particular technology, and you think, oh gosh, I have no idea what I'm supposed to be doing with that. And I think the real you need to just ask questions. You need to ask your head of department, ask your Senko, ask the local authority or the Senko at trust level, and just say, I've never used this before. Don't feel bad that you've never seen this particular piece of tech before. Just ask and say, right, what do I need to do with this to get the best out of it for the student? Why has this been provided for this particular student? And just don't feel any shame, because sometimes I think in busy schools, that information might not come to you in a way that you would want it to. So sometimes you have to really be the one to step up and say, right, I'm teaching this child. it says here quite clearly that they need this. Where do I get it from? How do I use it? And you be the one to take responsibility for that on behalf of the child, because sometimes even the children won't know why they've got this piece of adapted technology.
Yeah, definitely.
Sorry, Kat, go on.
I was going to say, yeah, and have that conversation. You know, I worked with a young person from year 4 to year 6 who had, on paper, was blind, registered blind, but did have sort of some level of sight. And having that conversation, because actually that's that young person's special educational need, and that's nobody will ever understand what life and what the world is like for them, except for them. And sometimes having that conversation of, okay, so shall we go to that size, or do you prefer it on your laptop screen, or do you prefer it on the big screen with a magnifier? Do you prefer it in this way? Do you prefer it in that way? So having that discussion and letting them be part of that choice of tech. I mean, I'm not saying for, you know, really high specialist things that might come from an advisory service, but, you know, if you're looking at smaller pieces of tech, what do you want? Do you want a recordable cushion that you can cuddle and that will tell you and give you confidence, or do you want it like this? Or sometimes giving them that choice.
Yeah, that's perfect. And I think a lot of the tech that you've just mentioned there, actually, you could use it for the whole class. We don't have to single students out that need some additional tech-based assistance. If there is something that actually the whole class can use, but we're all using it in different ways and we are truly differentiating our lesson, that is almost like the utopia, isn't it? Because no one then is being singled out for having this particular device that, you know, I'm the only person in the class that has it. And I think talking about Kit in particular, that you mentioned, and I can see behind you, Kat, he is a perfect example of a device that actually every student can have. It's just that we're all using it in a different way, and therefore no one's being singled out, but we're all using the same device in different ways to meet our educational needs.
Yeah.
Definitely. I've got a couple of things just to echo with that, and yeah, absolutely, completely agree. And it also comes back to us as teachers and being reflective practitioners. It wouldn't necessarily come directly from the student and that conversation with that student, but for us to acknowledge it, to reflect on how well that session went, and then acknowledge that this child needs a little bit of additional support, then you'll start to have the conversations. And it is about reflecting on the strategies that you've used within the lesson to support those students and what could be done slightly different. I think what excites me, and obviously I'm nowhere near as experienced on this side as yourself, Kat, but like I said, through my last 3 years of weird and wonderful journeys, you hear things or you see certain things throughout the work that you do. And one of the things that I think is really interesting, and whether or not teachers know about it as much, are the accessibility features on things that we use day to day. For example, the immersive reader on Microsoft Word, which is absolutely fantastic to help you sort of structure your language and use that a little bit better, but a little bit more controlled. Also, and through exactly my experience of working with lots of different people, you kind of have to adapt the technology that's around you. And I'll give you a couple of examples. So I had to do an assembly for deaf students, and they had a sign language expert in there, but it was all done virtually. So I had to have my PowerPoint on one side, have a split screen, and then have my face there, as you do in any webinar. The only thing is they were using Microsoft Teams, and Microsoft Teams isn't fantastic for having control over your split screen. And a lot of these deaf students were relying on reading my lips. So I had to, the power of YouTube and the internet, you can see how's the best way of doing this. And I made a makeshift split screen that I was able to still deliver the assembly. They could see the content on the PowerPoint, but then still make my screen big enough so they could see myself as well. And that's kind of part of the fun as well, seeing what you can do with the tech that's around you and merge them together and make the most of them. And it isn't necessarily going to be one size fits all, exactly as you said. It's going to be, ideally, that would be great if we had something specific for each student. But then it is about knowing what technology is out there right in front of us right now and what accessibility features they have. For example, PowerPoint subtitles
Yes.
resource is fantastic. And I can imagine half the people don't know about that, but it is brilliant. And it's one of the really intuitive ones as well. Also, and I might get shouted at for saying this as well, when we're not necessarily edtech, but technology that can support education, you could say, the power of social media, and in particular, dare I say, Twitter as well. And the only reason I say that is just to share a very quick story with you. So I did a year 11 assembly, all about making the most of an opportunity, valuing connections and the networks around you. And it was really nicely received. But I then got an email from a year 11 student who said that his brother was a child with autism, quite severe autism as well. So he said that he's reaching the end of his school time at school, and he's a bit nervous about what to do career-wise. We don't really have as much support as we would like in that situation. I held my hands up to this child and said, look, I'm not an expert in this area, but I'm sure that if I put something out on social media, I'm sure that people would get in touch. So I took a screenshot of his question, put it on social media. Within half an hour, 45 minutes, I had a mini CPD session on all the strategies and support that's out there with regards to careers and or children with autism. And I just thought that's what social media is. That's the power of it, and that's how it can be used such an effective way. They were like head teachers of autism schools saying that we'd be more than happy to read a CV and give you support. And I think that sometimes it isn't the bells and whistles, weird and wonderful things that we've got. It's also just going back to basics and seeing what's right in front of us as well, which can be really, really useful. So that's my insight on it.
I was only going to say, well, EdTech in terms of, a lot of EdTech now is accessible. So I'm thinking, it's giving young people send the same access to what you'd give your whole class access to. Is a huge thing. And definitely I've been sat in on 2 sessions this week, one from Microsoft and one from Google. And both of these, I had no idea the accessibility features that they both offered. And maybe that was coming from a primary teaching background. And I think I
don't think it is, to be honest, Kat. I think the features get updated so regularly that it's actually really hard, even if you're in, even in my role as a computer science head of department, you still can't keep up with all of the changes that are happening. So it is really useful to have those sessions and to actually see what's been updated, what's new.
Yeah. I was amazed. Even for in my own workplace, I was like, well, this would make my life so much easier. I can't believe it. So definitely, I think just giving yourself that CPD time.
Yeah, definitely. And those subtitles that you mentioned, Bassett, are so useful. Zoom do subtitles as well, don't they? Live subtitles. And I know a teacher who was using Zoom for his live lessons whilst he was homeschooling. And he has a student that actually is deaf. So he now has Zoom on in his class. So he'll just set a laptop up. So it's on and it's on the interactive screen behind him, but it's just for the benefit of the subtitles. So as he's in front of the class, the subtitles are live behind him. And sometimes they're a bit iffy, but they are really accurate. They're really, really good.
They never get my name right, though. Never once have they got my name right. I won't repeat what the subtitles put as my name.
Oh, you ought to try their name, that's it. Okay, so shall we move on then to what would we advise school leadership to be mindful of if they are making purchases for SEND or vulnerable students? So if they're purchasing technology, what kind of things that they should be considering? I think having school leadership and having been a budget holder for tech within the school, my biggest advice would be that it doesn't have to be expensive. Just because something's really expensive doesn't mean that it's the best. And mean that actually it's going to deliver the outcomes that you really want. I think you have to really know what it is that you want to achieve with the piece of tech and then do your research. But in my experience, and I've been stung a few times buying things that were really very expensive, and you had to go cap in hand to the head teacher or the business manager and say, oh, I know my budget's this, but I really want these. They don't always deliver. There's a lot of style and not substance in the marketplace for education and edtech, in my opinion. But Bassett, what do you think?
No, yeah, I think you're absolutely right. It doesn't have to be the most expensive thing. And I think we've all been experienced educators and we've seen the start of the academic year and you're told about this new thing that's going to be the best thing, the in product, and then no one's talking about it at Christmas time. And I think that schools are definitely getting better at it, but we've all been guilty of it, all been stung a little bit with it. So the advice that I'd give to any leaders that are looking to buy or purchase anything, it actually doesn't come directly from me. I did a talk for a number of different people around thinking about EdTech and what strategies to consider when you're thinking about what to get. And I came across a guidance report by the Education Endowment Foundation, and there were 4 key areas there. I think point number one is really good, though. It's just basically consider how the technology will improve teaching and learning before introducing it. So do your due diligence. Think about who's going to benefit from this. How is this going to benefit the teaching? Will it add to the teacher's workload, or will it actually improve the teacher's workload? How does it work in terms of this world of blended learning? Has it got a place for use at home? And then ultimately, the training for the teachers and the cost, I think, are the big ones that you need to consider. Is it feasible to train a certain group of staff within the academic year so they're confidently using this? So they're all things you just need to consider. But that EEF guidance report is absolutely fantastic. It articulates things that we as educators would say. And Kat, I think you alluded to a couple of them earlier as well, about doing your research and knowing what that product is and being confident with it. So yeah, it's really about just doing your research, having a measured approach on saying that, okay, who is this going to benefit? Is it worth it when we think about the amount of training, the cost that this is going to be, and what impact is it actually going to have? If you can answer all of those questions in a really positive way, then it's definitely worth moving forward with that EdTech.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. I think another point in that same EEF document is, don't just use technology for technology's sake. Does this problem need a technological solution? Because sometimes it doesn't, and sometimes we're just doing it to be showy, or is it really necessary? What do you think, Kat?
Yeah, no, definitely. I think my biggest thing listening to that and following on from what you said, Bassett, was it's such a bigger process than just buying the tech or buying something. It's about what happens after. If anything, the after purchase is far more important, because just giving teachers some new tech to use, a new piece of software, some new robots, some whatever it is, even as simple as a talking point or a talking postcard, it's what to do with it. Again, it's that opportunity for staff as a group to play and learn, because that you get the best out of the tech. Or when you empower your staff with how to use it, then they'll empower the children with how to use it as well.
Yeah, I agree. I think you need to really consider that CPD piece, because it's so stressful to be presented with something and expected, because X amount has been spent on it, that you're going to start moving it into your lessons and not feel comfortable with the tech itself. Yeah. And I think as a school leader, you should really think about, as Kat, you've just said, the after purchase. What support is there in place? Is there any CPD provided by the company? And what does that look like? But also, if you're prepared to spend several £1,000s on a resource, are you prepared to invest a similar figure in giving your staff the time to actually have that time off timetable and learn how to use it properly? Because when I was head of department for computer science, my computer scientists were brilliant. They were absolutely brilliant, and they would have got on board with anything that I put in front of them. Did they have the time to do it? Not always. No, that was the bit that was missing. That was like the secret ingredient. So, you need to be prepared to put your money where your mouth is in that respect as well, not just the actual resource itself.
Yeah, and ways to use it in lots of different areas, isn't it? It's, not just to use it in the sense of computing or just in the sense of an IT lesson. It's that opportunity to look at something and be able to have the headspace to sit back and go, well, actually, I could use the BeBot in my maths lesson, or I could use that to increase motivation in art, because, I've noticed the kids are dipping in their motivation. So having sometimes the opportunity to just sit back and think, how could I make this work in lots of different ways, makes the money you invest in the technology so much more worthwhile.
I think not to go off on a tangent, but that's the beauty of educators, though, isn't it? That they're so creative in when they see a product or they use a product, and they're using it in ways that you just wouldn't have even considered as well. And I think it goes to that you definitely have that onboarding process in place and know exactly how it's going to be implemented in, and how you're going to use it. At what point do you want your staff using it? But also, and this is as much to the EdTech companies as well, look at the weird and wonderful ways that teachers are using their product and celebrating it. And I know Jem, you've said similar with regards to kit as well. You want to put the onus on the teachers and say, this is the product, this is what we believe it can do, but now we want you to take the ball and come up with some amazing ideas with what to do. And it was something that I came across, and I would never have thought of it when I saw it, and it was just basically a 3D printer. And there was a school that got some funding to get a 3D printer hub in Derby, and it was brilliant. And I was asked to go to the opening of the hub and just see how they're using it, and they'd somehow managed to use the 3D printer to support reading and language and writing. And the way they basically did it was they 3D printed key characters from stories that they were doing and just brought those stories to life. And I just thought little subtle nuances to the technology there have increased that engagement in a way that I definitely wouldn't have thought of using it. So that's what's exciting about using the EdTech. When you've got those early adopters using it, that love it, confident with it, want to go and celebrate what it's about. And then it's just about getting that other 80% on board as well, and knowing that you might have a bit of a battle. And exactly as you said, Jem, it's about investing in that and knowing that it's not going to be just everyone's going to be using it overnight.
Yeah, definitely. Amazing idea with the 3D printing.
Yeah.
Yeah, just really, really simple.
And I think where you can use tech, like you said, Kat, cross-curricularly, the more you can use it throughout school, the more confident the children will become, the more confident the teachers will become, and the more beneficial that spend will have been, because you're using it in different areas to support learning in different ways. So that's fantastic.
And I was just thinking, listening to what you were saying, Bassett, that actually it doesn't always have to be the how to use the tech is the focus of the learning, but it could be a motivating factor. It could be around their well-being. It could be around reducing anxiety, so that they're ready to learn and access learning. So I think sometimes seeing things as, it's the technology isn't there to learn how to use it. It's there to motivate, engage, make children ready to learn.
That's an amazing point.
That is a really good point. I think tech is one of those things that if you can do it right, it eliminates that fear of failure better than other things, because everyone's expecting to be a bit nervous about using any tech, even the teacher. And if they see the teacher not using it correctly, then just imagine what that does to that child's anxiety levels. They would feel so much better that, okay, if the teacher's not using it exactly correctly, then that's not a big deal. Okay, if I'm not doing this bit correctly, then does it really matter that I'm not doing this bit in maths correctly as well? I can get the support that I need for it as well. I think that's a really interesting point. I've never really thought about it like that.
And because I suppose I sort of got thinking more about it, doing some of the writing around Kit, was looking at actually Kit, yes, is incredible as a robot for learning and to support learning process. Actually, the well-being side and having calming resources on Kit, and having messages from home, or having breathing techniques, or being a piece of technology that manages and sort of regulates emotion, so that then the young person's ready to be in the classroom.
Brilliant.
It's not something I ever did when I was teaching, but I'm definitely, if I was back in the classroom, it's something I'm like, I kind of wish I was there now to be able to do it.
If they ever turf us out, Kat, we'll be there with all the results.
But yeah, it just was particularly with the real big focus for schools at the moment on emotional well-being and support.
Yeah, absolutely. I think when I was designing Kit as well, something that I was really mindful of from my days as a head of department was I would challenge my staff if they came to me with something, will we still be using it in 3 years' time? Because if I'm spending this much money, is it for this year or is it for a few years? Will I get a whole cohort through on this piece of tech? Because the tech world moves so quickly that sometimes if you buy something that's really niche, it will become quite outdated quite quickly. So when I was designing Kit, I was designing him simply in a way to have that simplicity last for a few years, because how the teacher chooses, like you say, Bassett, they're so creative. They'll use Kit in ways that I never even imagined, and I hope that teachers do. But that means that he's got longevity within the classroom, and he won't just be something that's sat in a cupboard in 18 months' time, which is not what we want for our resources. So, we ought to move on because we're going to run out of time. As you can see, I'm getting to my plenaries. Like my plenaries at the end of lessons were literally like, we've got 2 minutes. So moving on, where have we seen EdTech being used to amazing effect? So whether that's closing an education gap, so whether it's working with children in digital poverty, whether it's working with our PP or our vulnerable students or our SEND students, what examples have we seen, or from our colleagues or from ourselves out in schools, Bassett, perhaps in your current role, that are just really good examples of where tech's being used? What do you think, Bassett, if you start?
It's really difficult to name lots of different tech, because obviously I go up and down the country and see lots of tech being used, but it's going to be different per school, and it goes back to that, what the teachers want to get and what their outcomes are and what they want for the child. And ultimately it is about trying to bridge that gap, so trying to bridge that attainment gap. Technology will support that so much, but it goes back to two people really, the teacher in the classroom and the student themselves. And I'm going to give some very random ones, and the two that I'm going to give are icould.com and Your Game Plan. And the reason for that is that with all the work that I do supporting disadvantaged children, the kids are fantastic, and the first question they'll always ask is, yeah, that's great, but what's the point? Why are we doing this? How is this going to benefit me? And it should really be about that. The child should always see that whatever year they're in, what they're learning today, how is that going to impact them in years to come? How is this going to benefit them in years to come? Some it will be for, and as crass as it sounds, some it is going to be monetary reasons. Is this going to help me to get to where I want to in terms of a job? And I think that's something that's so important to think about, even at a really early age. And the reason why I choose iCould and What's Your Game Plan is because they're two web-based sites where you can just research loads about careers and see what's the future of careers as well, and hopefully get that catalyst and that idea of what you're passionate about. And it will be up to the teacher to sort of nurture that, to spot that, to reflect on that, and to try and nurture it, to ensure that every time you have a difficult moment with a child, they're not exactly doing what you want, or you want to just give them that boost. If you know where they're heading to, and you can sort of advise them and support them and empower them to think that, well, if you continue down this road and work on this specific area, then this will help you in turn to reach that goal. So it's a little bit different to how one set piece of ed tech that can support you. Exactly as you said, Jem, that concept of digital poverty, we know that it exists, and it's going to be really difficult to find that fine balance with what we can do with tech that will support everyone. I think Kit is fantastic in the way that it's heading in that right direction, and I know that you've put a lot of thought into that with the SD card, so it can be picked up and taken home. It's not necessarily requires Wi-Fi or anything like that, but I think it goes back to the children and what their why is, and how can we get them to that why, and helping them understand what their why is, really, more than anything.
Yeah, it's a great point. An initiative that wasn't mine, I can't take credit for it, but something that springs to mind. When I was teaching, the secondary school that I was teaching in before I joined RM was in quite a deprived area, and there was a real issue with parental engagement, because it was a small town. A lot of the parents had attended the same school, so that was the school that they'd gone to. They'd had a bad experience of being at that school, and therefore they actually had almost a phobia of engaging with the school because of their own childhood experiences. So we had a real difficulty with parents attending parents' evening, even picking up the phone to school to discuss child's progress. So one of my colleagues started a STEM club, an after-school club for parents and their children to come in and basically play with all the kit and just play with the robots. And that was really successful, really nice way to re-engage those parents that then obviously as a result of that were then more engaged with the school life in general, and therefore their child's attainment improved as a result, which I think is just a really nice thing to think about. If you've got all this expensive ed tech, can you engage your local community? Does it have to end at 3:15 when the children go home? Who else would benefit, and how are you going to benefit the children in a more holistic community sense with the resources that you have in school? So I think that's something to think about as well.
Yeah,
and I'm very conscious of time. Sorry, before you say that, Kat, I just want to really echo that, and it's so important. So the work that I do is obviously building the aspirations of young people, and sort of, I don't like saying building the aspirations. Everyone's got aspirations, and they'll all vary, but it's giving them the knowledge and making them feel empowered that they can go in any direction they want to go. But also going back to the parents is so true, and if there's anything that can be done to sort of educate and support the parents as well. A lot of the workshops that I do are around competitions and the television industry and stuff, but it's essentially learning through stealth. They're learning something without even knowing it, learning through play, learning through stealth. And I like the idea of doing that with parents as well. So the idea of taking something home and working through it, letting parents know that this exists and this is something that they could benefit from as well, is something so powerful. Yeah, so definitely would echo that, Jem.
Yeah, again, I'd echo the same. And the sort of way I've seen it used the most effectively, particularly in primary settings, is to use things like the learning platforms, the homeschool platforms, where young people, the children, as part of a plenary session or as part of the lesson, actually have to record themselves explaining the concept. You know, we know that when you have to explain something, that puts it into a different part of your memory, and it helps from all the research. But if then as part of that session, you know, if it was a maths lesson and as part of this plenary, they'd be explaining, well, this is how you do the new method of multiplication, and this is where you put these numbers, and in the tens column you put this, and in the ones column you put this, and explaining that. Then if you're setting a homework activity for the child at home, they can watch themselves back, share that with the parent, and it's a less threatening approach than, you know, well, we've got to have a parent's afternoon to explain to you the new methods of multiplication, which can be really intimidating, you know, and it helps that barrier of, well, we didn't do it like this at school. You know, I look at things and, you know, when I was going through teacher training, I was like, well, I never learned it like this, you know, and, you know, phonics wasn't around when I was at school in the same way. So I think if that's where I've seen EdTech, is that using EdTech to put sort of aspects of classroom learning into the home, so that it's accessible for parents to then be able to be equipped to support their young people. Otherwise, if we don't give parents the tools to support, however can we expect them to, because they didn't learn it in that way when they were at school.
Yeah, that's such a good point. And I am going fully off piece now, but we do have 15 minutes. So I think it would be remiss of us not to talk about home learning, blended learning, the catch-up curriculum, the recovery curriculum, and the world in which, you know, teachers are living and students are living at the moment. What kind of tech do you think is going to help us sail through these choppy waters to get everyone back on track? And I say that with a pinch of salt, because track is a construct. But what do we think about that? Because tech's been so heavily relied on during the periods of lockdown, and I know that teachers are finding it really challenging to take children now off of screens and back into a classroom environment, and even, you know, getting children to sit for 60 minutes and concentrate on something that's not on a screen. How teachers might feel a bit conflicted. They might feel like perhaps actually these children have had quite enough technology for the last 12 months, so we're not really interested in that now. What resources do you think could be used to complement that catch up and that recovery without necessarily being on a screen? And just caveat that I have no issue with children being on a screen for learning. It's just that I am of the opinion that they've had quite a lot in the last 12 months, and that we can do better as educators, that we can make things a bit more exciting. So what do you think about that?
I think, yeah, I completely understand what you're saying as well, Jem, about the screen, and there always has to be alternatives as well to the screen, and teachers, I think, are a bit more comfortable with that as well. I do think that screen time isn't going to go away anytime soon, but it's about any ed tech that is considering that there is an alternative to it as well, especially for home learning, blended learning, and any, like you said, catch-up curriculum or anything like that. Because one thing that I drew your attention to a while ago was also two people challenging education and also poverty-proof your school. And poverty-proof your school, their mantra is basically look at your school through the eyes of your most disadvantaged child, and never take that for granted, what they have access to. And not to labour the point with Kit, I can tell that that's something that's been at the forefront of what you've done with that. And it isn't digital. There isn't necessarily screen time to it. He's got a face that is interactive, but also the idea that you could take it home with resources on, that clicks of buttons, you could add something that parents and the child can interact with and reflect on, I think is very powerful. And I think, yeah, it's about knowing what technology is out there and how it is going to cater for every single person. So something as simple as, okay, if you're going to send out some resources to do on a certain app, is there a paper-based version that if you have to send it through? When I did the session with Poverty Proof Your School Day, they shared a story where a child had to do a homework, and they went on the bus and just did a route of their bus 3 or 4 times over because they didn't have Wi-Fi at home and had to kind of access the Wi-Fi from the free Wi-Fi on the bus. And it's just considering all of those little things, which is a minefield as we get more technologically minded and everything. But that's a digital divide, and it's probably a conversation for a different day. But ultimately, have you thought about that, the most disadvantaged child in your classroom? And that's always a good place to start from, really, I think.
It's such good advice. And when I was doing the research for Kit, given that I'd been a teacher, a technology teacher for such a long period of time, I was astounded by the lack of access to internet at the home, different devices that children had. And, you know, it's not just a small pocket of children that this affects, actually. It's actually really quite a huge number. So, yeah, I think that's such a good way of looking at it, you know. Take the most disadvantaged student in school and what is their experience of life at home. Another thing I think has been born out of the pandemic that saddens me is the lack of kinesthetic computer science teaching that's happening in schools at the moment. So, you know, our floor robots, for example, that are difficult to clean perhaps, and they're difficult to share at the moment, and they're certainly difficult to share outside of bubbles. And obviously, hopefully that's all coming to an end soon, and school will return to something less bubbly, but that computer science curriculum that's not being delivered at the moment, and that the catch up that's going to be required really for students to re-engage with that's quite heartbreaking to me personally. We do have a really lovely resource that we've just onboarded called Robotify, which is a digital platform that teachers can use to program robots whilst they're not able to use the physical robots, or to complement the physical robots once they're back in use in classrooms. So that's another one I think to have a little look at on top of the ones that you've suggested, Bassett. What do you think, Kat, about tech post-pandemic?
Yeah, I think, you know, I was speaking to a head teacher probably a few months ago, and he was sort of saying, you know, he sees the role of tech in, like you say, bridging that gap between home and school. And if we can provide technology that makes learning possible regardless of the home circumstance, or that they can access something regardless of what's at home, then we need to be doing that. You know, we wouldn't send children home expecting that they'd have Cuisenaire rods for maths to do, or number frames, or, you know, we come up with different ways. Oh, let's use an egg box and we'll cut it up, or let's bake some buns and we'll make tens frames with that. So we need to see technology in a similar, I mean, this is just me, blue sky thinking, like, I'm not sure how you do it, but I think we have to see it in that same way. We wouldn't expect children to go home and have access to microscopes for science at home. So we need to think similarly with technology. Otherwise just creating that broader gap. And it's not necessarily the children's fault. You know, it isn't their fault if they can't have access to that technology for whatever reasons at home. You don't want to be making the child feel bad that they can't engage, but equally you don't want to be making the parents feel bad if, for whatever, you know, whatever their circumstances are, because that's something that they can't necessarily fix. And we're just creating sort of a feeling of upset.
Yeah, and more barriers to learning. And I think you've touched on some really great ways in which tech can be used for mindfulness and well-being as our children recover from the pandemic. I read a really interesting article yesterday that said that mandatory outdoor play might be enforced for the rest of the academic year, which I was like, yes, that's amazing, because children just haven't been able to socialise and play outdoors. But I guess as well, there's other ways in which teachers can be creative with their tech and get it outside, you know, get in the fresh air, do something collaborative, take a video camera and go and make a documentary in the playground, or, you know, make a mini beast documentary. Get your rugged robot and do your programming outside in the playground, because we need to be in the fresh air and we need to be working together and enjoying what we're doing in the great outdoors to try and help with that mindfulness and well-being and recovery, psychological recovery. Go on, Bassett, I love how you put your hand up.
Just a side note with that. Obviously in this weather, just be mindful that it's not hailing. I got caught in some hail the other day.
Oh
so
my gosh.
Yeah.
Storms yesterday.
Yeah, fingers crossed.
Definitely the outdoors, I think, because we often do outdoor learning really well in the early years. You know, I know when I was teaching in nursery, we're free flow between indoors, outdoors, and then it almost seems to peter off. And I think we need to make our outdoor learning environment as accessible as our indoor learning environment. You know, if you took all your tables and chairs outside, I'm not saying do that, but if all your tables and chairs were outside, you'd be teaching outside because that's where it's easiest to have children out and learning. So we need to think about setting up our outdoors environments and having the right equipment like rugged robot or different things to make outdoor learning the possible and the choice.
And there's so much tech that you can teach outdoors. Like if you're in the playground and you've got that space, there's so much that you can do. You can take some chalk and draw a star network and a bus network on the playground. Like learn the binary dance, which you can find on YouTube if anyone doesn't know what the binary dance is. It's like, yes,
I'll do that later.
You know, but learn it outside in the playground. Like there's so much that you can take outdoors if you just put a little bit of thought to it, which teachers will be doing, weather permitting, obviously. But I think that's a great way to blend recovery and well-being and psychological recovery with the curriculum that we need to deliver, and still drip feed the tech into it as well.
Definitely.
So yeah,
when my daughter putting my parent hat on, when my daughter comes home, she's 7 now, she's more likely to have remembered and engaged with the things she's done outdoors. And I think that's very true, isn't it? The more that you can incorporate into that well-being, fresh air, whatever it is, it's a different scenery as well. I think that's a really good idea.
Well, I'm going to quickly move on to my last question because I am really mindful of time. I could chat all day. I asked these guys to think, if you could invent one product that solves a problem at the moment in schools or for future problems in schools, what would it be? I'm not going to answer this because this is literally my job. And in many ways, you guys are helping me with my job by answering this question. But Bassett, what did you think?
So mine would be a little bit more web-based. In fact, it's something that I'm working on at the moment, but I'll go more into why is the problem for me. I think it's this idea of teacher retention and looking after your teachers and teacher well-being, but also coupled with the parent engagement as well. So I'm working in the background on a little platform which will support teachers at every stage of their journey. I mean, the fact that you guys do the work that you do, and it's come from the fact that you are educators, I think it's so important to celebrate educators and the different skill sets that they bring to the table in so many different ways that can be transferred into other areas. And that's not to say that leave the profession, go off and do X, Y, and Z, but you'll be amazed at the amount of things that you can do and experiences that you can get and then bring them back into the classroom. That just allows you to feel a bit more empowered as a teacher. So it's the two things that I'm really passionate about are the empowering of teachers and also supporting parents, which will ultimately support the children as well. And anything that can be done to support them is always a really positive thing. And I love the fact that Kit is already considering that and the ideas around taking it home, getting the parents just as involved in that. I think that I keep going back to that because that is something that I think is just a really good idea.
Brilliant. What would your
I think mine would be, I don't know what it is, so this is for you to create and make, Jem, but
I'm literally taking this
around the empowering of young people with their well-being and with their voice. So something that would support them with being able to learn and sort of regulate their emotions, or a tool that they could use for that support. And I know a lot of well-being is an interactional thing and you do need the support from an adult, but you know, all around the mindfulness, the well-being, I think is really important. Or I think vocabulary and language and being able to model, enrich and empower. I know that's two, but I just think
really good stuff.
If we can empower and enrich and young people with their voices, that opens up so many doors.
Brilliant. That's brilliant. Okay, so I just have some delegate information, which I'm going to go through. I feel like when you buy insurance in this, I'm just going to go through the, if you just want to listen.
Small print.
If I'm going to go through that now, but anyone in the audience that has any questions while I'm just reading through this, if you want to drop them in the chat whilst I'm doing it, and then we can pick up once I've gone through. So within 24 to 48 hours of this session, which we're really grateful that you attended, thank you very much,